Today I want to talk just a little bit about Ducati's air-cooled L-twin motor, 2-valve heads, and maybe just a short explanation about why it's called an L-twin instead of a V-twin. So first, a bit of background on this motor. Ducati was known throughout the 50s and 60s for their single-cylinder, their small single-cylinder engine. But in 1968-69, Honda produced the 754, and that was the beginning of the superbike age, and all of the other manufacturers had to respond by coming up with larger displacement engines that could compete with the Honda 754. This engine, or the predecessor to this engine, was Ducati's answer to that. And it was first produced in July of 1971 in a sort of a pre-production bike called the 750 GT. Today those bikes are the holy grail of Ducati collecting, and so they are, six-figure bikes. I think there was only a few hundred of them produced. But Taglioni was the engineer, the famous engineer at Ducati that developed this engine, and he was inspired by something called the, I want to say the bicylindric racing engine that Moto Guzzi was producing. Now, why did he create this concept of an L-twin? Why is it called an L-twin and not a V-twin? Well, Taglioni himself hated this engine being called a V-twin. Typically, a V engine is more upright, like this, with the it looks like a V instead of an L. So why do we have an L-twin engine here? There's a couple of things that are unique about this configuration. First of all, back in the 70s, when everything was air-cooled, one of the big problems with V-twin engines was that the rear cylinder was shrouded by the front cylinder, and so cooling of the rear cylinder was a problem. You only have to look at a Harley-Davidson today to understand that. The Harley's 45-degree V-twin. The front cylinder gets, great fresh, cool air, and the rear cylinder gets the hot air that's coming off of the front cylinder. And so you're never going to have those two cylinders running at the same temperature, and so you've got a tuning problem there. So, excuse me, Taglioni solved this problem by tilting his engine forward, creating a 90-degree V, and putting both cylinders in the airstream so that the rear cylinder had cool, clean air flowing across it, and the front cylinder also had cool, clean air flowing across it. And that's why it's an L configuration instead of a V configuration. Now, the other thing about this configuration is that it's a... Oh boy. One moment, please.
They're lighting off. A duet, it seems like.
It's a 90-degree configuration. So engines are always, there's a lot of engine configurations out there that have balance problems. If you can imagine a single-cylinder engine with a piston that moves up and down, that engine is balanced in this direction, but in this direction there's a lot of vibration. As the piston goes down and the crankshaft turns, and the weights on the crankshaft go forward and backwards and up and down, there's a lot of vibration. And so on a single-cylinder engine, you can put counterweights on the crankshaft and you can counteract half of that vibration, but you can't get it all out. And you'd put the counterweights at a 90-degree angle to actually the piston movement. But with a 90-degree V-twin, this cylinder and the counterweights for this cylinder actually become the counterweights for the other cylinder. This is known as the vertical cylinder in Ducati, parlance, and this is the horizontal cylinder. So they actually have counterweights that are set, 90 degrees and 270 degrees from each other, and this creates supposedly a perfectly balanced motor. Now, I hear that all the time, that these are perfectly balanced motors, but I can tell you that these great big giant pistons do shake and vibrate. This bike vibrates quite a bit when it runs. There are some disadvantages to this design. A couple of different things. Number one, the engine is very tall, but that's always a problem with the... damn those birds. The engine is very tall, but that's always an issue with V-twins. The other thing too about Ducatis is, you know, this rear cylinder, you've got a lot of heat right here underneath the gas tank, and you've got the exhaust pipe that comes right here underneath the seat. And so I've got a couple of Ducatis. My other ones are water cooled, and every one of them is just really hot to ride. These bikes were meant to be out on the open road. They are not fun to ride around town. You just get a lot of heat that swelters up off of this exhaust pipe and out of this rear cylinder when it's warm out, and you will cook. Another problem with these engines is, because you've got this horizontal cylinder sticking way out front here, the mass of the engine has to be set further back in the frame, and the engine itself is longer than, say, a inline 4. So these things require a longer wheelbase to fit these engines into the frame. But the other problem is, if you're a fan of MotoGP, you've seen the Ducati team struggle over the years, because whereas, say, an inline 4 or a V motor, whereas the mass is further forward, providing additional weight on the front wheel to help with turn-in and to help with wheelie control, the weight on the Ducatis are further back. And so we've seen the Ducati MotoGP team struggle with that, and their answer eventually was to move to, of course, a water-cooled V4 and tilt it in the normal V fashion so that they could move the weight forward and get the bike to turn better. You'll hear people say all the time, well, Ducatis don't turn. And one of the reasons why they don't turn on a racetrack is because of this situation with the weight distribution. Other than that, it's a fantastic design. It's a wonderful machine. Something else about this motor, as it's evolved over the years, this is still an air-cooled 2-valve motor, and Ducati is still producing a derivative of these today in the Scrambler class. So from 1971 to today is December in 2018, these motors have been produced continuously by Ducati. Now, over the years they've changed. We no longer have what they used to call bevel drives that had a series of shafts and gears that turned the camshaft. Today we have belts. But there's still desmodromic valve heads, and you can research that online. There's some excellent videos of people talking about what is a desmodromic valve. And there goes the birds again. So if you're like me, you're going to want to hear this thing run, because it is absolute music. And so I'm going to start this thing up, and we're just going to listen to it for a minute. I can actually feel the exhaust hitting me in the face all the way back here.